Delving into the history of the Arizona Coyotes involves the original Winnipeg Jets, the one that came over from the Western World Hockey Association in 1979. Now, of the teams that came over from the WHA, the Jets struggled the most. They had 20 wins their first season, and they had 9 their second season, and they allowed 400 goals. One of the worst, most miserable seasons ever in 80-81. Then things changed. 81-82, they got 80 points. They finished second in the Norris division. One year they played in the Norris division. I was looking for rookie season, but yeah, rookie season is going to be dominated by Tamu. Once Dale Hawerchuk came in and there was some structure to the team, the Jets turned around fast. When you look at 84-85 and you look at 87-88, no, 86-87, in those two seasons, they were really a solid team. And the Jets suffered in that the best teams in the league were Edmonton and Calgary. So they were the third best in the Smythe and stuck behind a dynasty and a team that would have been a dynasty if it wasn't for the Oilers. So that's their struggle. And then, of course, in 1996, they were moved to Arizona. But let's look a little bit at the Winnipeg thing here. The birth of the original Jets. Two of the most active voices in the formation of the WHA were those of Wild Bill Hunter and Ben Hatskin. Both men operated junior teams located in Edmonton and Winnipeg, respectively. Hatskin, a former football player with the Blue Bombers of the Canadian Football League, had owned the Junior Jets since the mid-60s. He gave him the same nickname to his WHA team when the league began to play in 1972-73. The league's first season had 12 teams split into two divisions. Winnipeg was in the Western Division along with Alberta, later Edmonton, the Chicago Cougars, the Houston Aeros, the Los Angeles Sharks, and the Minnesota Fighting Saints. The watershed moment for the upstart league came in June 1972 when Hatskin signed Chicago Blackhawks superstar Bobby Hull to a multi-million-dollar deal to play in Winnipeg. The departure of the Golden Jet from the NHL paved the way for other players to follow suit. But the Jets' recruiting wasn't limited to one side of the Atlantic Ocean. Winnipeg pioneered the initiative to scout European nations for hockey talent. To start the 74-75 season, the team acquired Swedish forwards Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nilsson and their countryman Lars-Erik Sjöberg on defense. All three players had represented Sweden at the previous year's World Championships. Hedberg and Nilsson were assigned to play alongside Hull, the threesome becoming known as the Hotline. The league's most dangerous trio. Sjöberg, an outstanding blue liner, had served as captain of the Swedish national team. Eventually, he became the first European to wear the C for both a WHA and NHL team. The Jets ended the Houston Aeros' run of two straight Avco Cup titles by winning the championship in 1976. It marked a run of 3 Avco Cup championships in 4 years for Winnipeg, as the Jets also skated off the ice victorious in 1978 and 79 in what would be the final WHA season. Winnipeg was one of 4 WHA teams that merged with the NHL. The NHL incarnation of the Jets didn't enjoy the success of its predecessor, winning just 9 games of 80 in 1980-81. The team struggled to get above the 500 mark, even as it drafted a franchise player and future Hall of Famer, Dale Hawerchuk. Playing in the same division, as the powerhouses, Edmonton and Calgary, made it all but impossible for the Jets to advance far in the playoffs. In 1996, the struggling Canadian economy forced the sale of the team and the relocation to Phoenix, Arizona, but 2 decades later, the city benefited from the demise of the Atlanta Thrashers, which moved to Manitoba and once again became the Jets. So there we go with that. That is our introduction to the Winnipeg Jets franchise, which would later become the Arizona Coyotes. There's a great rivalries article in here as well, because it'd be real easy for me to bury the Coyotes in this whole video and just say, well, they've had a crap history. But there have been some good moments. It's just they do get buried by memories of Gretzky and the Battle of Alberta and everything that went on in the 80s as it was. And, of course, the move in the 90s overshadowed almost anything else that happened. But they had some very good teams. And struggling to be 500 or above 500, back in the 80s, that meant you were a good team. Good teams finished above 500. This was before the loser point was brought in by Canadians who suck. I really can't explain with enough intensity how much I despise the loser point in the NHL. In no other league does the losing team get a point. Only in the NHL. On May 20th, 1979, the Winnipeg Jets defeated the Edmonton Oilers in the sixth game of the Avco Cup Finals. It was the last game ever played in the World Hockey Association. The two teams joined the NHL the following season as part of a merger with four surviving WHA clubs. Although the Jets had won a record 3 Avco Cups, it was the Oilers who were destined for NHL supremacy. Blessed with an array of Hall of Fame-bound talent, the Oilers of the 80s assembled the greatest offensive rosters in the NHL. Their run of 5 Stanley Cups in 7 years came largely at the expense of 4 of their Smythe Division rivals, the Jets. In fact, Winnipeg has the unhappy distinction of being the only team to lose to Edmonton in the playoffs in each of the Oilers' 5 Stanley Cup winning years. So that's rough. As a fan of teams who've lost, whether it was Dallas losing to Detroit, Boston losing to any amount of teams, and the Canucks constantly losing to teams like Colorado and Detroit, losing to the team that wins the Stanley Cup has two effects. One, you can say, well, we were close because we maybe you took the team that won the Stanley Cup to 7 games, but you didn't win. So it doesn't feel better watching them hoist the Stanley Cup in June because you think to yourself, geez, maybe if we'd beaten them, maybe we'd be the ones hoisting that cup. Their first postseason meeting in 1984 was a whitewash for the Alberta squad. So mismatched were the teams that the Edmonton Northlands Coliseum failed to sell out the first time in 243 games. After the Oilers demolished the Jets 9-2, Winnipeg general manager John Ferguson told the Edmonton Sun, "I'm expletive, I'm guessing it's effing, embarrassed." The Jets responded by taking the Oilers to overtime in the second game before Edmonton's Randy Gregg scored the game winner. Edmonton completed the best-of-5 sweep in Game 3, thanks to a solid performance and goal from Grant Fuhr. In 84-85, Winnipeg impressively earned 43 wins and 96 points during the regular season. Yet the Jets were still in the match for Edmonton in the playoffs, falling in a 4-game sweep in the second round. Wayne Gretzky tied his own record with a 7-point outing in Game 4 to clinch the series, and I remember that year. And I was really pulling for the Jets. I remember they got through round 1, and I thought, maybe this is the year, and it just didn't work. And it was upsetting how right from the opening face-off of Game 1, you knew the Jets were in over their heads. In 1987, Winnipeg fans started a tradition with the first ever whiteout. Every fan wearing a white T-shirt. While the energy was successful in sparking the team to a series win against Calgary, the run of Jets' futility against Edmonton continued as they were once again swept in the next round. Let me know if this all sounds familiar. The Jets finally ended a 13-game playoff losing streak versus the Oilers on April 9th, 1988, with a 6-4 win in Game 3 of the division semifinals. Lo and behold, it was their only victory of the series. In 1990, Winnipeg had its best chance to finally slay the dragon, as it were, vaulting to a 3-1 series lead over after Dave Elliot's double overtime goal in Game 4. However, the Jets were motivated by harsh criticism from Jets assistant coach Alpo Suhonen, who called them arrogant and completely lost. Edmonton rallied to take the next 3 games, sending the Jets to the golf course again. So you do not talk about the other team. You just don't do it. But that's Winnipeg. And after they went to Arizona, and there's nothing in there about Arizona because that book's really Canada-centered. After they went to Arizona, they made the playoffs from 97 through 2000. Made the playoffs every year and lost every year in the first round. They have only been out of the first round once, and that was 2012 when they made the conference final. I remember that against the Kings. And they were third in the conference. They finished first in their division that year, but they were still viewed as massive underdogs. And they did well, but to this date, they've only got 100-point season, and their last 500 season was 13-14. It doesn't look like they're going to be 500 this year either. Phoenix is one of those teams that I I genuinely feel bad for, and I want to see them do well. I want to see them turn it around. Their all-time record, they have 1,180 wins, 1,295 losses, and 121 overtime losses. So you can add those to the losses. It's not a great record for the Phoenix Coyotes. Um, and former Winnipeg Jets. And yeah, they've faced Edmonton 6 times in the playoffs, and they've won a total of 4 games against them. So it's not good. The only teams they've beaten in the playoffs, they've beaten Calgary 2 out of 3 times they've played them. They've beaten Chicago the only time they played them. They beat Nashville the only time they played them. So when they went to the conference final, that doubled the amount of series they've won in their history. So with that being said, and considering that their coach currently is Dave Tippett, and it's funny because Dave Tippett is widely regarded as one of the best coaches in the NHL, and I agree that he is. But he's not been able to get them anywhere. And yet, unlike every other city where a coach would have been fired ages ago, Dave Tippett keeps his job. I'm not saying that Tippett shouldn't. He's a damn good coach. It's just kind of strange to me. All right. Let's get into the totals. All right. I'm back. Let's see. I just paused for a moment there. Okay, games played leaders. Shane Doan, unsurprisingly, is in the lead there with 1,473 games played. Teppo Numminen is second with 1,098. I like Teppo Numminen. He was one of my favorite defensemen. Thomas Steen, 950 games played. Underrated player. And I like his kid, too. Plays for the Blues. Dale Hawerchuk, 713 games played. Doug Smale was one of my favorite players. 691 games. Keith Tkachuk, 640. Zdenek McCulloch, 609. Randy Carlisle's in 8th place with 564, tied with Martin Hanzal, so Hanzal's about to skip over him. And Keith Yandel with 558 is in 10th place. It's not a bad list of players in terms of a top 10. Goals. Shane Doan with 397. So he's knocking on the door for 400. Rightfully so. He's been a solid player his whole career. Dale Hawerchuk, 379. Keith Tkachuk, 323. Thomas Steen, 264. Paul McLean, 248. Doug Smale, 189. Again, one of my favorite players. Morris Lukowich, who was also one of my favorite players in the 80s, 168. Loved Laurie Boschman's game. He had 152. Jeremy Roenick, obviously after they were the Coyotes, 152. And Teemu Selanne with 147. Selanne should have had more. Assists, Thomas Steen leads there with 553, but Shane Doan's only 2 behind him. Hawerchuk's 550. Some interesting ones on this list. Paul McLean with 270 is in 6th place. 7th place, Frederick Olesen with 249. One of my favorites of all time, Dave Babich with 248 is in 8th place. Tied for 10th, Laurie Boschman and Jeremy Rowan with 227. On the all-time points list, it's Shane Doan with 948. I don't think he ever hits 1,000. He's started dipping in terms of his point totals, but he'll hit 400 goals. And then yeah, it's the same suspects all the way down. Morris Lukowich rounds it out in 10th place with 345 points. It's not a bad chart considering this is a team that I've just been basically saying, look, these guys have never had any success. Power play goals, Shane Doan leads the way with 126. Dale Hawerchuk, 122 is next. Keith Tkachuk has 114. Let's get some interestings out there. In 8th place is Eddie Olczyk, and he's tied with Radim Verbata, who they both have 45, so Verbata may leap over that. Pat Elnick has 44. He is 10th on that list. And then shorthanded goals, Doug Smale has 25. He's first place by a mile. And rightfully so. Doug Smale, fantastic player. Great defensive forward with decent hands. Dave McElwain is 5th on the list with 9. Dallas Drake is 6th on the list with 8. And then in 9th place, it's a tie with 6 goals between Damon Lankow, Mike Sullivan, yes, the coach Mike Sullivan, Nelson Emerson, Shane Doan, Bob Corkum, and Ron Wilson, of all people. So that's an interesting list. Now, wins. Goaltending has not been a friend of the Winnipeg / Phoenix franchise in general. They've had some mildly good goaltending at certain points, but for the most part, it's been rough, and it's part of the reason why Edmonton and Calgary owned them in the 80s. Number one in wins is Ilya Bryzgalov with 130. Number two is Bob Essensa with 129. Next up, Nikai Habibulin with 126. Then Mike Smith has 110. He's fourth on the list. Sean Burke is 97. Then Brian Hayward with 63 is in sixth place. There's a three-way tie for seventh between Doug Sotart, Daniel Berthiaume, Bandit, and Curtis Joseph, all have 50, and Pokey Reddick with 41. And then, let's see. It's in here. Shutouts. Habib Bullen with 21 and Bryzgalov with 21. They both lead the way. Mike Smith has 19, so he's on the outskirts of potentially getting into first place on that list. Sean Burke with 15, Bob Essensa with 15, Cujo with 8, Brian Boucher with 5. I think he had those all in a row. He went on that weird shutout streak with Phoenix, and that was the end of it for him. That was the highlight of his career. He had good games after that and decent seasons as a backup, but he never got close to that again. Interesting, too, is that even in the age of so many shutouts, there's a two-way tie for 10th in Winnipeg's history for shutouts. Robert Esch and Marcus Matson, both with 3. So it kind of shows that, you know, they've been around for quite a while as an organization, but Phoenix has struggled. There's no way around it. Phoenix has struggled. And I think the way they're doing it now with all these young kids coming in, it's going to be rough this year. And it the potential is that this could still be a 2 or 3 year thing. Attendance has been a problem for Phoenix. Attendance has been a problem for Arizona in general, regardless of where the team is playing. And there's always been fans, it seems like primarily in Canada, who have an attitude of, look, you took the Jets away for less than this, so Arizona shouldn't have a team either. I had felt that way at one point. At this point, I'm just numb to it. There's been so many instances of financial issues with the Coyotes that I just don't pay any attention to it anymore. As long as Gary Bettman's in charge, as long as ownership is structured the way it is, there will never be a point where Phoenix gets moved. They showed no patience with Atlanta, but they've had infinite patience with the Arizona team. And I'm not sure if it's because the Jets got moved there and they don't want to look bad because the team doesn't work out. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's to save face. I know they've talked a lot about how Austin Matthews grew up watching these Coyotes and that now he's an NHL star, so look, see. But I don't know that even while Austin Matthews is this fantastic talent, and he is, there's no doubt about that, does that justify losing millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars? Because that's what they've done. And the NHL has been kind of running the team and funding it, and this is where revenue sharing goes, is into teams like Phoenix. It's a complicated issue, and it's not something that I can certainly say definitively, oh yeah, no, move them, because where? And then the thing too is, when I see a team that can't get its attendance figures up, that tells me it's a team that can't win either. I remember in Vancouver had the Grizzlies in basketball, and after some poor seasons at the gate and just generally poor everything involving the Grizzlies, they got moved. And I mean, I understood the NBA saying, well, we're not making any money, nobody's coming to the games, but the team was brutal. The team was really bad. So you could not justify spending the money to go and see them when they were really bad, and they weren't getting any better. So from that point of view, I can understand if Phoenix fans, Arizona fans are staying away. I call them Phoenix because that's what I know them as. So I understand they're the Arizona Coyotes. That's the reason I'm doing this video today, because A is at the start of the alphabet. But I still think of them as Phoenix. I know they don't play there, but I still think of them as Phoenix. And they've always had a struggle, and it is something that I think they will continue to have. They're never going to be one of the have teams. They're never going to be a big budget team. They're never. I don't know if they'll ever be a contender, because it's going to be hard for them with their internal budget to pay all these kids when their entry level contracts are up, and keep that internal budget under control. So I don't know how easy it is for them to build a contender. I hope they do, because 30 strong franchises is the best I could hope for as an NHL fan. Forget whether I cheer for or don't cheer for an Arizona team. Every team being strong and competitive is best for the entire league. It increases gate revenues. It increases interest in the league. It increases viewership in the U.S. It increases the visibility of the sport. It helps everything if this team is able to become a contender. But with Arizona, what I've seen goaltending has just been sort of wishy-washy the whole way through. I love Bob Essensa. Great guy. And, when he was a backup in Vancouver, he was the most popular player on the team. But he was a backup goalie, and he was used as a starter for far too long in Winnipeg. And Arizona seems to have that right now, somewhat with Mike Smith. Mike Smith played well last year, injured right now as of this taping on October 29th. Depending when you're watching this, he may still be injured. And now they got Louis Domingue. And Domingue may be a very solid backup, but it speaks to the problem in Phoenix that they've had for years. And the depth hasn't been there. There have been a lot of missteps at the draft table. I mean, we've got time. I can go through a few of those too. Because it's an organization that's frustrating watching it as a non-fan. Now, Dylan Strome looks good. Clayton Keller should be good for them. Jacob Chikrin's definitely proven himself so far early in the season. And Fisher looks good. So the recent draft picks you're looking at a good, solid bunch. And Max Domi, Laurent Dauphin, potentially Perlini. But then you look further back, and Gormley, DeSenton, they were both considered to be, these guys are both going to be great. They were both first rounders in 2010, and they both fizzled. And that's the same year they drafted Domingue, actually. That's interesting, too. So, it's one of those things, and I'd be interested to hear what other people think. How do you fix it? I think Phoenix is getting there. I think hiring this young wonder kid GM is a really bold move. I think hiring a GM in his 20s is really, really gutsy. And it speaks to the fact that they know they need to do something different, and that they need to think ahead of every other team. Probably because they're not going to be able to pay what every other team plays or pays. So it'll be interesting to see how this season turns out. I don't think they hit 500. I think they bottomed out 2 years ago with a 56-point season. Would they love Nolan Patrick there? Absolutely. If they could draft a center, and I know Nolan Patrick's not projected to be a franchise center, but if he can be a good second-line center for them and help beef up that offensive crop they've got growing there, it can't hurt. But anyways, I'd be interested to know your thoughts, and I will be talking about the Buffalo Sabres next. Another team that has had a struggle with success over the years. They've had some very good teams in the 70s, some very good teams in the 90s. Who are we kidding? They had Dominic Hasek in the late 90s. and yet they just couldn't quite get there. Just this close. And as a Canucks fan, I can identify with that. But for today, we're talking about Arizona, and I'll be interested to see in the comments what anybody else has to say about the Zona Coyotes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I will be back talking to you all again very, very soon.